Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Africa Update, reaching you here from Trust TV Studios in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. And this week on the program, we'll still be looking at ECOWAS at 50, but with a bit more in-depth conversation on what it's meant to be and what's happening so far. To stay with us, we'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us here on Africa Updates. I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. Now, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is a regional political and economic union of 15 West African countries. The initial plan was 15, but apparently with the exit of the Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, now they're down to 12. It was established on May 28, 1975 by the Treaty of Lagos, and its mission is to promote economic integration, political cooperation, regional peace and security, and development across member states. Now, as May 28th was 50 anniversary, 50 years, Golden Jubilee of ECOWAS coming together. And last week on the program, we touched on it briefly, but this week, let's kind of go in depth into the conversation. Now, joining me to discuss is Professor Muhktar Imam. He is a professor of international relations. Good afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
So let's get into the conversation. Generally, let's start there. What's your take on ECOWAS at 50?
Well, first of all, congratulations to the body and congratulations to the chair of the body, yours sincerely, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Apparently, ECOWAS, just as with other regional or global institutions, was established on a certain premise and with certain mandates and purposes in mind. Specifically, ECOWAS was established to, like you said in your opening, achieve economic or deepen economic integration amongst its member states, and then, of course, to ensure political stability and deepen security cooperation amongst its member states. So far, so good. ECOWAS has done the most it can within the ambit of what is tenable. A lot more is expected of the regional body, particularly at a time where the world requires multilateralism, where we are currently. But we're seeing multilateralism take the back seat, and ultra-nationalist figures are rearing their heads. See, for example, American first ideology of the United States President Trump. This is a time where the world needs to come together. We need to break bounds, break barriers, and come together. Beyond that, and then, of course, drawing the instance home, was seen at a time where ECOWAS is supposed to be waxing even much more stronger. The ICE, for example, Sahel countries which you spoke to, are pulling out or withdrawing from the fold of ECOWAS, which doesn't really augur well for the body as far as achieving its mandate is concerned. So, but generally speaking, so far so good. ECOWAS as a body has tried as much as it can to ensure that some, subtle achievements are recorded with regards to cooperation, whether it be on the level of the countries, the 15 countries, currently 12 within the fold, or even deepening South-South cooperation. So I think I'll give the body a fair, pass with regards to its successes so far since its establishment.
So there's this ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme,
Right.
ETLS. Now, it's goods supposed to move freely across member states without tariffs or quotas. So far, how has that impacted the member countries?
Okay, so like I said in the opening, ECOWAS was established to ensure the deepening of economic integration and cooperation amongst member states. As a matter of fact, one of the cardinal objectives for which it was established is the deepening of economic cooperation, which is what the name implies. And so you'd find that within the charters of ECOWAS, there are a lot of instruments that speak to achieving or attaining that mandate. One of which is the article which speaks to free movement of persons, goods, and services across borders. And then, of course, Article 3, of the revised treaty of ECOWAS, which clearly speaks to economic integration and tries to go further to establish an instrument with which to achieve that, which is what you have just talked about, the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme. That scheme is essentially, was established to ensure that all of the ideals for which ECOWAS was established are achieved. And you would find that in the typology of economic integration, there are essentially 3 or 4 key pillars, that you must put in place as far as drivers of economic integration is concerned. And one of them is obviously, trade liberalization in itself. And then, of course, you have common custom, common tariff, common currency, etc., etc. They all fall within the fold of what helps you to attain economic integration, particularly within the sub-region or even at the regional level, speaking of the AU. But that instrument seemed not to have achieved its mandate for an array of reasons. ECOWAS or its member states are faced with myriads of challenges in as much as deepening economic integration is concerned, in as much as ensuring the protection of persons, goods, and services across borders is concerned. Because you see, you don't detach, or rather it's extremely difficult, removing security from economy. For you to achieve any meaningful economic integration, either at the macro or macro level, whether you're looking at it within the domestic environment of national sovereign state or at regional or even sub-regional levels, such as we have in the case of ECOWAS, you must ensure that and guarantee safety of people or persons. You must ensure safety of the borders, and so on and so forth. Until and unless these things are accomplished, it makes it extremely difficult for the juice, the benefit of that integration or the policy to be achieved. And beyond that, you find that there's also the question of countries trying to protect their territorial integrity and ensuring that some level of security is guaranteed. And so it's quite difficult, to completely open up these borders and allow for ease of movement of goods and services. Because the one thing that goes with the movement, trans-border movement, are social vices. That's the one essential that you cannot detach from trans-border movement. And so countries are being wary of that. And so you find that countries are essentially putting in place certain mechanisms, say, for example, immigration policies or stifling immigration policies. Under the Muhammadu Buhari administration, for example, you saw that we had to shut the borders at some point.
Yes.
It was existential for our survival as a national entity. And of course, as you may know, in the power or realist theory, national interest and national security are the 2 critical objectives of every sovereign entity. So achieving, completely that scheme appears to be proving difficult, especially at a time where we're seeing, like I said, the waning of multilateralism. Countries are no longer interested in, deepening multilateralism. Now it's about ultra-nationalist ideals and myself, me first, etc., etc.
All right. So there's this other thing that they put in place, and that's for other import tariffs from other countries. Now, how has the CET, that's the Common External Tariff, how has that improved our inter-regional cooperation?
Well, you see, the idea of having a CET itself is proving difficult because the case of, or rather, what we're trying to replicate is what played out in the EU.
Yes.
But for us to achieve that, whether at the level of ECOWAS or at the level of the AU, and that's why you find that things or instruments such as the African Free Continental Trade Area, for example, is suffering some setbacks. That's why you find that instruments such as ECO, for example, the single currency that was to be established for ECOWAS, had to stall, because when you look at the conditions for joining ECO, you would find that it states specifically that for any economy that intends to join, you must ensure that in 3 consecutive quarters, you're able to utilize the national budget of your country to at least 60% efficiency rates. which is something that is lacking in most of the African states. Most of the African states, not even the sub-regional states. And we're part of, I think it was just one country or two that were able to achieve one or two of the mandates, or rather the requirements of ECO. And so, you see, it's extremely difficult where you find that domestic economies of these independent sovereign states are not viable enough to be able to absorb, to put in place shock absorbers that will absorb, say, inflationary issues, for example, when it hits, whether on a global scale or at a regional level. So if that is not in place, and you do not have a sovereign wealth guarantee, you do not have an external reserve that will be able to prove to investors out there that you have the capabilities to absorb shock, how do you expect to survive within the fold? Right? Opening up your economy will not do you any good. Rather, you become liabilities to one another. So the only way to ensure that that is achieved is, first of all, to come inward and ensure that we put our houses in order, ensure that we support one another at a certain level where we can ensure that every economy, performs averagely well. Then we can begin to talk about the implementation of these instruments. And so for me, and from the way I see things, I don't see that being accomplished anytime soon.
All right, so last week on the program, the guest I have said that France was the main enemy of the ECO becoming a reality in the ECOWAS. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, it's right. That's for me, well, again, of course, these are social issues. They are as debatable as they are subjective. But the reality is, when you look at events that are transpiring within the international system, you come to the conclusion that is not so far from the submission that that individual has made. Because, you see, France has always tried to put stumbling blocks in some of the things that we do, using its erstwhile colonies, right? And which is essentially not very healthy for ECOWAS itself as a fold, where you have people who are hell-bent on achieving the principle of Francafrique, which is what France is using to dominate its erstwhile colonies. It's a policy that ensures that politically, economically, militarily, the colonies of France are consistently tied to France. And that's the reason why even the CFA itself, translated in English, means former colonies of France. So it goes to tell you how very deep, yes, it goes to tell you how essentially deep they intend to, continue to subjugate their erstwhile colonies. And this is what the policy of assimilation, effectively tried to do. And it is still trying to do that even after flag independence has been achieved. It is going even much more deeper, today, because the policy of Francafrique essentially tries to keep countries like Mali without having a standing army, countries like Cameroon without having a national bank. And if you do not have a national bank, how then are you a country? Because when you look at the Westphalia Treaty of 1648 and its definition of what a state is, first, it says a standing army. You must have a standing army. You must have a national currency. But you find that these countries are leaning towards France.
They're not necessarily a state.
Well, I would leave that submission to you. Mine is to make the analysis. So, you see, it is apparent that France is trying to, or was trying to use its erstwhile colonies to ensure that it keeps ECOWAS the way it is. Look, we cannot run away from the fact that our current predicament is as a result of two factors. One, external interferences. Second, internal contradictions. This is the reality of where we are.
How do we resolve that? Because we can't say we want to do great things and still allow people tell us from outside how to run our homes.
Right, right.
And then how do we internally, come together? These issues have to be resolved.
Yes, they have to be resolved, and it takes will. Right, we're beginning to see a changing world order in the unfolding global, structure, particularly the instances of Burkina Faso, of Mali, of Niger, and other countries, the Gambia, etc., currently saying, look, we're expelling French companies, expelling French nationals, go back to your country, leave us alone, we want to determine our own future. 10 years ago, or a decade or two ago, nobody would have imagined that this would be the case today. Paul Biya was president when Macron was 5 years old, right? Macron is president and Paul Biya still goes to call him Papa, the way he called de Gaulle, President de Gaulle, Papa. So you see, this is the level to which we have subjected and subjugated ourselves. And that's the reason why Julius Nyerere, Julius Nyerere in his analysis talked about 4 aspects of liberation. And he said for Africa to be free and do great things, like you have just pointed to, Africa must ensure that it liberates itself in 4 ways. 1, he said, liberating yourself from colonialism, which is what we've tried to do. At least we have achieved flag independence. Secondly, he said Africa must liberate itself from neocolonialism. We're still struggling with that. SAP, for example, was thrown at us, and we swallowed line, hook, and sinker, structural adjustment program. And we've seen a lot of other economic programs that have been churned out, and we have been taking liberalization, etc., etc. Even though people like Joseph Stiglitz, one of the finest economists in the world, have said, look, privatization and monetization and liberalization are not policies that can work in Africa, not now, because of our mindset, because of our thought process. Because we must understand that where there are socio-economic issues, there are also social-psychological conditioning problems. And until we fix these things pari passu, we will consistently progress in error. So Julius Nyerere said, secondly, we must liberate ourselves from neocolonialism. Thirdly, he said that Africa must liberate itself from Africans. Yes. The functionalists, the classical liberals who go to Ivy League schools and to World Trade Organization and to the IMF and to the World Bank and return back with these liberalization policies.
Someone like you?
No, not me. And return back to the country with these policies, and then you find that these same individuals will have billions of dollars stashed in foreign accounts. There was a time in this country where a bank executive was found with over 30 million or 30-something million pounds in a foreign account. This is somebody in the investment sector. If Nigerians have forgotten, the person is close to Intercontinental Bank, but I don't want to mention the name. So you see, so Africa must liberate itself from Africans. These are the sort of Africans that Julius Nyerere was talking about. And fourthly, and most importantly, he said mental liberation.
Yes, everything is actually...
Until you free yourself from the clutches of mental slavery, you will never be able to solve your economic, political, and whatever problems.
Okay. On that note, we're going to go on a short break, and when we return, the conversation continues. Please do stay with us. You're also on to Africa Update on Trust TV, and we've been talking about ECOWAS 50 relations and economics. My guest in the studio is Professor Muhktar Imam, and he's been quite... insightful in the conversation. Let's get back to it. Let's now go to external relations. We've talked about our internal relations. How are we faring with our relationships with the AU, with the EU, with the United Nations? And of course, right now, the 2 major economies are seemingly fighting to have a hold on the African continent. That's the America and China.
Right. I don't think it's just limited to America and China. I think it's what I would term the new scramble for Africa 2.0.
Yes.
1884, Berlin Conference came with its own,
yes.
And we're witnessing a resurge of that. Of course, Africa is the new bride. Everybody wants a piece of Africa.
Africa is always a good bride.
It always. For a continent that houses 60% of the world's arable land, I think it should be a good bride, because you will never hear of a food glut anywhere in the world. You might hear of petrol gluts, whatever other glut, but not food. People will always need food. And so this continent is fertile. This continent is blessed. You barely hear of earthquakes. The worst you could get perhaps is a tremor or something. But our worst, our curse is that of leadership and management of resources. And this is where the crisis is, because you find that the early nationalists who fought for independence across the continent were driven by 2 things. They were driven by Pan-Africanism, and they were driven by resource nationalism. And these are some of the things that are essentially missing, amongst our leaders of today. And that takes me to what I said earlier, the social psychological conditioning of our people. Because in that bracket, you find that there is the issue of patriotism, there's the issue of discipline, there's the issue of will, there's the issue of Pan-Africanism, etc., etc. To your question specifically, well, I think as a country and as a continent, our relationship with other parts of the world has remained where it is till present. What we have witnessed in the past is that we have always been treated as subhumans. We have always been treated as second-class people. And you will find that from the highest body in the world, which is the United Nations, you will find what I have just said playing out, and it is still playing out. Across the world, within the domains of countries in the West and in other places, you find Nigerians and Africans excelling. 40% of medical doctors in OECD countries are from four African countries. Nigeria is top on that list, followed by Egypt. So you have mass exodus of medical doctors from this country. After we train them, it costs this country between 40 to 60,000 pounds to subsidize medical school for one medical student.
That's in the federal government's
Absolutely.
institution.
So you find that after the training, they japa.
Not all of them.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is, I'm just trying to give you like a statistics with regards to number. You know, a chunk of what we churn out from universities are leaving the shores of this country. And a lot more are willing to go for no fault of theirs. When the Saudi Arabian embassy conducted an interview a couple of months ago, over 1 million people applied to leave this country, medical doctors. That was the number we got. Yes, for within the space of time. The applications they got, over 1 million applied to leave this country as medical doctors. And here we are, the WHO has brought out a statistic that says that there is 1 medical doctor to 5,000 patients in this country, and that there is 1 bed to 10,000 patients in this country. That is far below the standard of the World Health Organization, and we're battling with this. So when you find that the infrastructure is not there, when you find that the hub to accommodate the doctors we're churning out of the university is not there, I cannot study medicine, graduate, come and sit in my house or sit in my father's house, and I have nothing to do and no means to earn. So you see, we have not been able to position ourselves so well that there is the equitable distribution of resources within the international system such that the 50-plus country on this continent will sit around the table of the United Nations and speak with a common front. We do not have a place around the table of the Security Council of the United Nations.
I was going to mention that. We're still, as a continent, we have just one slot.
You can imagine. And your veto does not mean anything.
Yeah.
A 50-plus country, your veto does not mean anything. This is the irony. So you find that, I mean, there is that constant mind game. There is that constant psychological warfare. There will always be that biological and economic warfare. It will happen. Look, international politics has no morality. Anybody who thinks he will come to the international scene and try to be moral, no, you're going to take the back seat forever. And that's the reason why countries that have advanced their cause have defined their position, their interest, and their need within the international space. And so they will do whatever they can to ensure the guarantee and safety of their national interest and national security first and foremost. So no country is going to come and sit around the table and negotiate for you. Okay. And that's the reason why we must put our house in order. The Chinese were also colonized. They were battered by colonialism, right? But from 1949, look, in 1978, what was wealth for an average Chinese man is to own a radio, a bicycle, and a sewing machine. If you have these three things, you're a wealthy person. 1978, just behind us here. Today, from 1978, after Deng Xiaoping took over and the reform and opening up happened in China, look where China is today. China has moved 900 million people out of abject and structural poverty. And we are still here, struggling and battling. This is the largest economy in Africa. China is the largest economy in Asia. What stops us? We have the most population in Africa. They have the most population in Asia. What stops us?
Okay, Professor. Time. We have to wrap it up. And I noticed that you keep going back to Nigeria, but you know, we're talking about ECOWAS.
Absolutely.
So, final words on how we can make this work.
1 out of every 4 Africans is a Nigerian. That's why I keep going back to Nigeria.
Oh well.
Right. But that said, we need to ensure that we continue and consistently deepen cooperation and integration. And the only way to achieve that is to ensure that at the micro and macro level of our domestic terrains, that we ensure that all of the human development indices within our economy, hunger, for example, unemployment, is settled. Each of these states, 13 remaining and 12 remaining, I hope that the other 3 A's return back to the fold of ECOWAS.
Hopefully.
And that, again, if we had time, is something we would have touched on. The instrument within the ECOWAS Parliament is sufficient enough to address this situation. But I think the Deputy Senate President, who, by the way, happens to be the first Deputy Speaker of the ECOWAS Parliament, has his attention on other things. So I would want to use this medium and this platform to appeal to him to refocus, to come back. I think his heart is in a good place, but his focus is somewhere else. Okay. And that's the only way we can retrofit ECOWAS.
Okay, wow. There's so much to unpack in the conversation today, and time is not really friendly with us. We need to wrap up at this time. But it's been a pleasure having you on the program, sharing your insights on ECOWAS, Africa, Nigeria, and relations with the world.
Thank you for having me.
That's the much we have for you this week on Africa Update. For more of our programs, news, and documentaries, do follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. I am Chiamaka Nwafor. Same time, same place next week. Bye for now.